Hello my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I have a book review to share with you guys. Now if you're a regular here on my channel on Fridays, you might have been anticipating The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna, but honestly I didn't feel the greatest towards the end of the week, just a little under the weather, and I didn't get it finished in time. However, a couple days ago in my mailbox arrived A Reaper's by Onision. And I knew that would be a quick read, so I dove into it, and boy did I. You might remember, if you've been around for a while, that a few months ago I did a review on Onision's This Is Why I Hate You. We dove into that one as well, and that was a lot. I'll link the video to that review down below in case you haven't seen it and you're interested, but I'll give a quick disclaimer like I did at the beginning of that one. When I went into This Is Why I Hate You, I knew next to nothing about Onision. I knew he was a rather polarizing character here on YouTube based on recommended videos I would see pop up, either his own or videos people had made about him. So I just kind of went into This Is Why I Hate You blindly. So now I've got a bit more info, mainly because I read the book and then you guys left a bunch of comments kind of enlightening me further. And then one day I logged into Amazon and this popped up in my, recommended purchase section. Honestly, I was a bit wary at first, and I'm a book lover. I didn't want to subject myself to something that I wouldn't like. Why waste the time when there's so many good books, But curiosity got the best of me. That's all I can tell you. Anyway, you guys, this is on a whole nother level. It's a whole nother level. And I honestly don't know if he's trolling with this book or if this was his attempt at what he thought was going to be a real solid science fiction novel. I don't know. I honestly do not know. And as a general rule, if I read a book that I don't like, I don't talk about it on YouTube, mainly because I don't derive any pleasure from sitting here and shitting on an author who's, worked hard to put out a book. But there's just something about it that begs to be talked about because I don't understand any of this. I don't think this was released when I ordered This Is Why I Hate You, because when I looked him up on Amazon, there was only 2 releases listed. So from what I could see, this came out the end of December. Let's start with the very first page of the book. It's kind of like an author's note, and in very big font it says, "There is more." And I'm going to read it to you just so you can keep this in mind as we go further. So here's the note. It says, "Before you read this book, I want you to understand something. All of my books, Stones to Abigail, This Is Why I Hate You, and now Reaper's Creek, they're not creations of pure fiction. These are stories from my own life mixed in with my imagination. Many of the things told in these stories reflect on who I really was, what really happened, and what was going on in my mind. Stones to Abigail represented a better version of myself. Many of the events in that book happened in real life as well. This Is Why I Hate You represented the darker version of myself. Various aspects of that book were derived from my actual life too. But this one is simply myself, who I was both good and bad during the time this story takes place. As you read, I'll leave it up to you to decide what events really happened and what is a product of creativity." So there's that. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to give you a bit of a synopsis here at the beginning, and then I'm going to kind of go through some points that really stuck out to me as things that, well, you'll see. You'll see. The book is honestly really difficult to just give a brief synopsis of, because it's about nothing. A lot of things happen, a lot of things are said, but the book's not about anything. Not really. Towards the end, we get into something that might kind of resemble it being about something, but even then, it's not really about anything. And before I get into that synopsis, I do have 2 points that I need to bring up because I don't want to wait to talk about them. Number 1 is the pages aren't numbered. This was a major gripe I had with this one, and it's a major gripe I have with this one. It takes seconds to number the pages. I can't with the no pages. And number 2, this just, it made me laugh out loud. The first time, I think it's the first time, if not one of the first times the character is mentioned, he's addressed as Greg, which is Onision's first name. So at first as I'm reading, I thought, oh, he's writing it since it's about his life in some way. He's using his own name as the main character's name. But then in the next sentence, the character is referred to as Daniel. And then from then on, at least for a while, he's referred to as Daniel. But again in chapter 10, Greg slips up and names the character Greg again. And it's just really driving home that we get it. This is about you. So the first part of the book and the second part of the book are barely the same book. It starts off with young Daniel. He is very young, I think 11 years old when the book starts, and he's just returned home to his mom's house in Washington from where he was spending the summer with his dad in Ohio. So he's back home, his sisters are there, he's getting back into the swing of things, school's getting ready to start, and from there, weird things start happening to Daniel. He passes out a lot, he gets nosebleeds, he has strange injuries, he senses things, he's drawn to lights and feelings that he can't understand. Has one friend, that's really it, whose name is David. He has 2 sisters, he lives with his mom like I mentioned, and his stepdad who he calls Papa. For all intents and purposes, Papa and his mom seem to have a good relationship, and Papa seems to treat the children well. So kind of on the surface, Daniel has a very average life. He gets bullied at school from this kid named Philip, and things are just kind of, not great, not terrible. He's just existing. And then these weird things start happening, and then he starts getting abducted in the night by aliens. And keeps happening over and over again. His injuries start getting more and more severe. Then the book kind of just becomes this it becomes this science fiction novel with the aliens and the spaceships and the injuries and Daniel developing these powers, like with how I mentioned a minute ago, how he can kind of sense death. It begins to take on like a literal form, whereas if there's a dead body around, it will glow. And say even if it's an animal in the woods, he'll see the glow from his house and he'll know that it's there. Or at one point his mom has her friend over for dinner and the woman's pregnant, but to Daniel's eyes, her stomach is glowing, so he knows the baby's died. And just things like that, really weird things. From there, he goes on to have a big battle with the aliens. He begins to exhibit godlike qualities as his powers evolve more and more. And then at the end of the book, he has a actual confrontation with God and God's father, whose name is Kull, and who's kind of the all-powerful. And in this book, God is evil and he's responsible for all the bad things in the world. And before this confrontation with the gods, Daniel had realized that he had the power to change the world using his mind. He could, all the bad things, he could erase it. One of the things he does is he makes every woman's genitals contain teeth so that they aren't violated. And then at the end of the book, Daniel gets the girl and the world is put to rights in the best possible way, and that's pretty much the story. And as I'm telling it to you, I'm sure it sounds insane because it reads insane. And I'm usually fairly good at retelling a story so that it sounds coherent. I don't know what to tell you. So now I've got some notes written down here. And as you can see, we went to town here with these. None of these represent grammatical errors because there's not enough sticky notes in the world for grammatical errors in this book. They're everywhere. They're on every page. They're in every paragraph. However, what I wanted to mark off were words spelled wrong, words used incorrectly, and things that just don't make sense, things that are messy and jumbled and just don't make sense. And that's what these represent, and I'm sure I missed quite a few. You guys, some parts are laugh out loud funny, and I don't think they're supposed to be, unless I'm wrong, unless this is a straight up GD comedy and let's get to the notes. Okay, so the first thing that I have written down here is that the writing is much worse than This Is Why I Hate You. It's really clunky. The descriptions are worse. And one of the reasons my curiosity was so piqued by this book is that it's the worst rated out of all three of them. Because there's a third one called Stone's Abigail that I haven't read. But this one, Reaper's Creek, was the worst rated of them all, and that was too much. I had to check it out. So the writing's worse. There's no way around that. It's longer though, and it's heftier. Okay, number 2, the next note I have is what I've already mentioned, and that is how the first time we meet Daniel, his name is Greg, and then it goes to Daniel, and then in chapter 10, again, it is Greg. There were a couple of themes that I noticed, especially very early on in the book, and those are a fear of abandonment and also a deep distrust slash feeling that your boundaries weren't being respected by family members. You know, people who are supposed to be there to protect you. Daniel really feels as though they're not, and that his boundaries just aren't respected, and that's a little sad. Next up, there's one part where he's complaining about how teachers in the schools, or in his school specifically, just want to be heroes. You know, they're always so quick to step in, and they just want to be heroes. And then literally within the next couple of paragraphs, he's talking about his own hero complex. I don't know if that's in there to be funny or to illustrate that he's a hypocrite. I don't know. But it's weird. Another thing that just kind of bugged me, maybe for no real reason, is that at one point it's another summer break and Daniel goes back to Ohio to stay with his dad for the summer, and he meets a girl named Julia. At one point, him and Julia and one of their mutual friends is swimming in one of the local ponds. And once they're done swimming, they go to Julia's neighbor's house because the neighbors are on vacation, and they go in there and they shower. What's that? That bit bothered me so much because I was like, what kind of people would do that? So that might be a bit nitpicky, but that just drove me nuts. Then there's a really uncomfortable sex scene between an 11-year-old and a 15-year-old. Daniel being the 11-year-old, Julia being the 15-year-old, and just really uncomfortable. And then something weird happens, you know, and then something weird happens. But the summer comes to an end, and Daniel is on the flight back home to Washington. And while he's on the flight, one of the airline stewardesses has been possessed, I guess, by one of the aliens that are tormenting Daniel. And so she's talking to him. The stewardess is talking to him, but he knows it's one of the aliens talking to him. And the alien is asking him why he didn't impregnate the 15-year-old. Weird question for anyone to be asking, but it's interesting because I also mentioned in my review of This Is Why I Hate You that Onision kept bringing up impregnation. And so in This Is Why I Hate You, the main character is a teenage boy, and he seems like really fixated on it, impregnating his girlfriend. And now impregnating a teenager is brought up again. And that seems really weird to me. So yeah, that just seems really weird, and it makes me really uncomfortable whenever teenagers are talking about impregnating other teenagers. Shortly thereafter, we find out that Papa, who's Daniel's stepfather, and his mother have gotten a divorce, and it's kind of tossed in like an afterthought. And it's talked about all of a sudden how he was a bad alcoholic and had a drug problem and used to beat their mother, but like that wasn't built up at all at the beginning. And Greg seems to kind of acknowledge that a little bit, because he says that them kids never really saw it, so it was kind of the first time they were hearing of it too. But it was really just thrown in there out of nowhere, and I had to go back and read that sentence again because I wasn't sure if I was reading that right, but I was. So then there's a alien killing spree that happens, and then Daniel kind of saves the world, begins to change things for the better. Oh yeah, another thing with this Julia girl is sometimes she's Julia and sometimes she's Julie. And you could make the case that, well, maybe Julie is short for Julia, and that could be, but it's whole chapters. In the whole chapter, she's either Julia or Julie. It's not like he's talking to her and says like, hey Julie, but when it's being written about her, it's Julia. It's not like that. It's kind of like a trade-off back and forth between sometimes she's Julia and sometimes she's Julie. Then when we get near the end, it kind of switches gears, and it kind of reads like a piece of mythology, where we get the history of the world, we get, the story of God and his father Kal, and God's sister, who was created before him. Then we kind of reach a climax where Daniel destroys God so that his sister can take over, and then she finishes off putting the world in order, and then she makes Daniel promise that he won't mess with it again, that he will just leave it be the way that she puts it. And he can do a lot of mind reading, this Daniel, and so he calls it reading code. So he can read everybody and everything, like every physical thing and every person, their whole history, and see all their memories and know everything that they've done. And so at one point he sees that she's gotten rid of all prisons and military centers and cancer hospitals because none of those things are needed anymore. And then that's the end. I guess what I'll say is this. The idea itself isn't terrible. I can see what he was going for. The thing to me that is lacking the most is any sort of world building. When a book takes place in a place that isn't our actual current reality, you need a bit of world building so that you know what the rules are in this place. You know what all of that is. And once you know what the rules are, you can kind of adjust your expectations in your mind so that you can process what you're reading. But with this book, there's none of that. There's no explanations. There's no descriptions. Things are happening so fast and they're being described so poorly that it's very difficult to enjoy the story or even really fully understand what he's trying to say to you, because it's just said so poorly. And I don't know why he doesn't hire an editor. I feel like he'd probably be able to find one that could at least help him clean it up a little bit. Or I bet maybe he even has some friends who could, help him out. Pass it around to a few people, get their opinions, get their help editing. I don't know. Clearly telling stories is something that he enjoys, because this is the third book he's put out. So clearly writing is something that he wants to pursue. So, I don't know. And every so often when you're reading it, you can get glimmers of prose that isn't terrible. Like honestly, the end part that was all the mythology, that's the most cohesive part of the whole book. Even though it's still ridiculous and a little clunky. But, you know, I don't even know. And he can flow a book pretty well. Like there's a definitive beginning and middle and end, and the end comes at the right time, and it all the loose ends get tied. I'm trying to end on a somewhat positive note because like I said, I get no pleasure from coming on here and just being rude to someone, you know. But at the same time, there's just I had to share it with you guys because I know that people are interested in him and interested in his books. And one other thing, there's a lot of graphic violence in it. I read books that have violence in them, but with his, sometimes it just hits you real hard, like comes out of nowhere, and it just smacks you, and you're like, why? The same thing happened in This Is Why I Hate You. So very violent. That one was more violent, I think. Yeah. Anyway, you guys, I mentioned everything that I wanted to. After I filmed This Is Why I Hate You, after I edited it and put it up, there were a few things I was like, oh no, forgot to mention that. And I'm sure that'll happen again with this one. But for the most part, I think I've got it all covered. Anyway, you guys, thanks so much for watching. Again, if you're a regular, next week I will have my The Great Alone review from Kristen Hanna. I'll get it finished up this week. And yeah, let me know in the comments down below if you've read this book, if you plan on reading it. Let me know if you've read any of his other books. And I hope you all have a great weekend. Thanks so much for dropping in, and I will see you guys again on Monday. Bye.